Fake HOA men broke into our cabin at 2 a.m., threatening us with weapons. When one pointed a gun at me, my 12-year-old son Jake grabbed David's rifle and shot the intruder in the shoulder. The attack exposed a criminal conspiracy targeting mountain families. Jake saved us all. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 3 months ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to our family was my husband David losing his job at the construction company. We had scraped together every penny we had to buy a small cabin in Pine Ridge Mountains, hoping for a fresh start away from the chaos of city life. The cabin wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with a stone fireplace that barely worked. But it was ours. For the first time in years, my son Jake could run outside without me worrying about traffic or strangers. He could be a kid again. Jake had been through so much. The divorce from his father 2 years earlier had left deep scars. He barely spoke for months, spent most of his time drawing dark pictures, and had nightmares that would wake the entire house. But up here in the mountains, surrounded by tall pines and endless sky, I watched my boy slowly come back to life. David, who had become Jake's stepfather when we married last year, was patient and kind. He taught Jake how to fish in the nearby stream, how to identify different bird calls, and most importantly, how to feel safe again. They would spend hours together building things, fixing the cabin's many problems, and just talking. Everything seemed perfect until the letters started arriving. The first letter came on a Tuesday morning in October. It was typed on official-looking letterhead that read Pine Ridge Homeowners Association, in bold letters across the top. Dear property owner, it began, your property at 247 Whisper Creek Road is in violation of several HOA regulations. You have 30 days to comply with the following requirements or face legal action. The list was ridiculous. They wanted us to repaint the cabin a community-approved color, remove the small vegetable garden Jake and I had planted, and pay a $500 fine for unauthorized modifications to our property. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking with anger. We had specifically chosen this area because there was no HOA. Our realtor had confirmed it multiple times. We couldn't afford HOA fees, and we certainly couldn't afford to repaint an entire cabin. David frowned when I showed him the letter. This doesn't make sense, Sarah. When we bought this place, there was no mention of any homeowners association. Let me make some calls. His calls led nowhere. The phone number on the letter went to a voicemail box that was always full. The address listed was for a P.O. box in town that didn't seem to exist. It was like trying to catch smoke with our bare hands. More letters followed, each one more demanding than the last. They threatened legal action, property liens, and even foreclosure. The signature at the bottom was always the same: Robert Harrison, HOA Enforcement Officer. Jake noticed how stressed David and I had become. He would catch us whispering in the kitchen, see me crying over bills I couldn't pay, and watch David pace the living room late at night. The light that had returned to his eyes began to dim again. I decided to drive into town and do some detective work. Pine Ridge was a small mountain community where everyone knew everyone else's business. If there really was an HOA, someone would know about it. At the local diner, I struck up a conversation with Martha, a waitress who had lived in Pine Ridge for 40 years. When I mentioned the HOA letters, her face darkened. Honey, there ain't no HOA up here, she said, refilling my coffee cup. Never has been. But you're not the first person to mention getting those letters. She leaned in closer and lowered her voice. There's been talk around town. Some folks think it's connected to that development company that's been buying up properties. They make lowball offers, and when people refuse to sell, suddenly they start having all sorts of problems. My blood ran cold. What kind of problems? Oh, all sorts. Mysterious utility shutoffs, code violations that don't make sense, harassment from people claiming to be officials. And lately, there's been talk of break-ins made to look like official inspections. I left the diner with my head spinning. Someone was targeting families like ours, trying to force us off our land. But why? And who was Robert Harrison? That evening, I shared what I'd learned with David. His jaw tightened as I spoke, and I could see the anger building in his eyes. We need to be careful, Sarah, he said finally. If Martha's right, these people might escalate their tactics. Maybe we should consider installing some security cameras, changing the locks. I agreed, but deep down, I hoped it wouldn't come to that. I just wanted to live peacefully with my family. 2 weeks later, our water was shut off without warning. When David called the utility company, they claimed we hadn't paid our bill in 3 months. We had receipts proving otherwise, but it took 5 days and multiple phone calls to get the water turned back on. Then our internet was disconnected. The cable company insisted we had requested the cancellation, despite our protests. Again, it took days to resolve. Jake was getting scared. He started having the nightmares again, and I would find him sitting by his bedroom window at night watching the driveway. "Mom, what if the bad people come here?" he asked me one evening as I tucked him into bed. I smoothed his hair and tried to keep my voice steady. "No one's going to hurt us, sweetheart. David and I won't let anything happen to you." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. The final letter arrived 3 days before everything changed. This one was different. More aggressive. It demanded immediate payment of $5,000 in accumulated fines and threatened enforcement action if we didn't comply within 48 hours. David had reached his breaking point. "That's it," he said, crumpling the letter. "I'm calling the sheriff. This has gone too far." Sheriff Coleman was a kind man in his 60s who had known David's family for years. He listened patiently as we explained the situation, nodding thoughtfully. "I've been hearing more reports like yours," he admitted. "Someone's running a scam trying to intimidate people into selling their properties. Problem is, we haven't been able to catch them in the act." He promised to increase patrols in our area and gave us his direct number. "Call me immediately if anything else happens," he said. "And David, you might want to think about getting a security system." That night, David installed motion sensor lights around the cabin and changed all the locks. He also moved his hunting rifle from the closet to under our bed. "Just in case," he said when he saw my worried expression. November 15th started like any other day. Jake had a good day at his new school, David found some temporary work helping a neighbor repair his roof, and I managed to sell 3 of my handmade quilts at the local craft fair. For the first time in weeks, we felt like a normal family again. We had dinner together, played board games, and watched a movie. Jake laughed at the funny parts, and I felt hopeful that maybe the worst was behind us. We all went to bed around 10 p.m. David and I stayed up talking quietly about his job prospects and our plans for Thanksgiving. By midnight, the cabin was silent except for the wind in the pines outside. I woke up to the sound of footsteps on our front porch. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard them again, heavy boots moving slowly across the wooden boards. David was already awake beside me, his body tense. "Stay here," he whispered, reaching for the rifle. The footsteps stopped directly in front of our door. Then came a loud, authoritative knock. "HOA enforcement. Open up immediately." My heart hammered against my ribs. David looked at me with wide eyes. We both knew there was no legitimate HOA, which meant whoever was outside was not there for any legal reason. "We're calling the sheriff," David shouted through the door. "You have 10 seconds to open this door or we're coming in," the voice responded. David was already dialing 911, but our cell service was spotty in the mountains. The call wouldn't go through. Jake appeared in our doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Mom? What's happening?" Before I could answer, the front door exploded inward with a deafening crash. 2 men in dark clothing burst through our shattered door. They wore masks and carried flashlights, but no visible badges or identification. The larger man held what looked like a crowbar. "Nobody move," he shouted. "This is an official HOA inspection." David stepped protectively in front of Jake and me, still holding his rifle but not yet pointing it at the intruders. "Get out of our house," he yelled. "You have no right to be here." The second man, shorter but stockier, laughed coldly. "We have every right. You're in violation of multiple HOA regulations. We're here to assess the property for seizure." That's when I realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. These men were here to physically remove us from our home. Jake was trembling behind me, and I could feel his small hands clutching my nightgown. In that moment, something fierce and protective awakened in my chest. These strangers had invaded our sanctuary, terrorized my child, and were threatening everything we had worked for. "David," I said quietly, "get Jake to the back room." But the larger intruder heard me. "Nobody's going anywhere until we're done here," he snarled, taking a step toward us. That's when David raised his rifle. "I'm warning you," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Leave our home now or I will defend my family." The 2 men exchanged glances. For a moment I thought they might actually leave. Then the shorter one reached into his jacket. Everything happened in slow motion and lightning speed at the same time. The shorter intruder pulled out what looked like a gun. David swung his rifle toward the man, but he was too far away to reach him quickly. The larger man raised his crowbar, preparing to strike David. And that's when Jake did something that none of us expected. During the chaos, my 12-year-old son had quietly slipped into David's workshop area near the back door. David kept a small .22 rifle there, one he'd been teaching Jake to use for target practice behind the cabin. Jake emerged from the shadows with the rifle in his small hands, tears streaming down his face but his jaw set with determination I'd never seen before. "Leave my family alone," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. The shorter intruder spun toward Jake, his weapon now clearly visible, a large pistol that glinted in the dim light. My world tilted on its axis as I watched the stranger point a gun at my child. "Put the toy down, kid," the man sneered, "before you get hurt." But Jake didn't lower the rifle. His hands were shaking but he kept it pointed at the intruder. "It's not a toy," Jake said quietly. "And you broke into our house. David taught me that people who break into houses are dangerous." The tension in the room was suffocating. I wanted to scream, to throw myself between Jake and the gunman, but I was frozen with terror. David was trying to get a clear shot at the man threatening Jake, but the intruder was using our furniture as cover. "Last warning, kid," the gunman said, taking a step toward Jake. That's when Jake pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through our small cabin like thunder. The shorter intruder stumbled backward, grabbing his shoulder and cursing loudly. His gun clattered to the floor. The larger man with the crowbar spun toward Jake in rage, but David was ready for him. The butt of David's rifle connected with the man's temple, and he dropped like a stone. For a moment, nobody moved. The wounded intruder was groaning on our floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. His partner was unconscious. Jake was still holding the smoking rifle, his face pale as moonlight. Then the reality of what had just happened hit me like a freight train. My 12-year-old son had just shot someone in our living room. I rushed to Jake and gently took the rifle from his trembling hands. He collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "I didn't want to hurt him, Mom," he cried. "But he was going to hurt us. He had a gun." I was so scared. David was already on the phone with 911, pacing back and forth as he tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. In the background, the wounded intruder continued to moan and swear. "Sheriff's on his way," David said after hanging up. He knelt down beside Jake and me. "You did good, son. You protected your family. That took real courage." But Jake was inconsolable. The weight of what he'd been forced to do was crushing his young spirit, and I felt helpless to comfort him. Sheriff Coleman arrived within 20 minutes, followed by an ambulance and 2 deputy cars. The scene in our cabin looked like something from a crime drama. Shattered door, overturned furniture, blood on the floor, and 2 unconscious intruders. The wounded man was conscious by then, demanding medical attention and threatening to sue us for assault. The larger man had a concussion but was awake and equally belligerent. "We're HOA enforcement officers," the wounded one kept insisting. "These people are squatters. We had every right to enter this property." Sheriff Coleman wasn't buying it. "Show me your badges," he demanded. Neither man could produce any official identification. A search of their vehicle revealed crowbars, lockpicking tools, fake documents, and a stack of HOA violation letters identical to the ones we'd been receiving. But the most interesting discovery was a folder containing detailed information about our family, our financial situation, David's employment history, even Jake's school records. Someone had been watching us for months. "Sarah," Sheriff Coleman said quietly, pulling me aside while the paramedics worked on the wounded intruder, "I need you to know that Jake won't face any criminal charges. This was clearly self-defense. But there's going to be an investigation and you'll all need to be interviewed." I nodded numbly. Jake was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. The light had gone out of his eyes again and it broke my heart. Over the next few days, the investigation revealed a conspiracy that shocked our small mountain community. The 2 men who had broken into our cabin were part of a larger scheme orchestrated by Pinnacle Development Corporation. The company had been systematically targeting families with modest incomes who owned valuable mountain properties. They would create fake HOA violations, utilities harassment, and eventually escalate to home invasions designed to terrorize families into selling their land for pennies on the dollar. Robert Harrison, the mysterious HOA enforcement officer whose name had appeared on all our letters, turned out to be the wounded intruder. His real name was Robert Hayes and he had a criminal history dating back 15 years. The larger man was Marcus Webb, Hayes' partner in crime. Both men were facing multiple felony charges, including breaking and entering, assault, fraud, and conspiracy. But the investigation didn't stop there. Sheriff Coleman discovered that Pinnacle Development had been running similar operations in 3 other states, victimizing dozens of families. The company's executives were arrested, and their assets were frozen pending trial. The news media picked up our story, and suddenly our quiet mountain cabin was the center of a national conversation about corporate greed and property rights. Reporters camped outside our damaged home, asking for interviews and wanting to photograph Jake. We refused all media requests. My son had been through enough trauma without having his face plastered on television screens across the country. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Jake and I had to testify at multiple hearings, reliving that terrible night over and over again. Each time, I watched my son retreat a little further into himself. He stopped eating regularly. His nightmares returned with a vengeance. He quit drawing, quit talking about his day at school, and spent most of his time sitting by his bedroom window, watching for threats that weren't there. David and I found a child psychologist in the nearest city, Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, who specialized in trauma therapy. 3 times a week we made the 2-hour drive to her office. Jake is carrying an enormous burden, Dr. Reeves explained to us after his first session. He feels responsible for violence even though he was protecting his family. At his age, the brain isn't equipped to process this kind of moral complexity. She recommended family therapy sessions in addition to Jake's individual treatment. We learned about post-traumatic stress, guilt responses, and the long road to recovery. Healing isn't linear, Dr. Reeves told us. There will be good days and bad days. The important thing is that Jake knows he's safe and loved, and that what he did was necessary. Meanwhile, David threw himself into repairing our cabin. He replaced the front door with a solid oak one, installed a complete security system, and reinforced all the windows. I think the physical work helped him process his own trauma from that night. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, checking and rechecking the locks, and lying awake listening for footsteps on the porch. The sanctuary we had found in the mountains felt violated, and I wasn't sure we could ever feel truly safe there again. One afternoon in late January, there was a gentle knock on our new front door. I opened it to find Martha from the diner, along with 3 other women I recognized from town. "We brought dinner," Martha announced, holding up several covered dishes. "And we're not taking no for an answer." They bustled into our cabin, setting up food on our kitchen table and making themselves at home. It was the first time I'd had visitors since the incident, and I wasn't sure how to react. "Honey," said Agnes, the town librarian, "what happened to your family was wrong on every level. But what Jake did was brave. That boy saved your lives." "We know it's been hard," added Carol, who ran the local grocery store. "The whole town's been talking about it. Not gossiping," she clarified quickly, "but caring. We want you to know you're not alone." They stayed for 2 hours, sharing stories, offering help, and treating Jake like the hero many of them believed him to be. For the first time in months I saw Jake smile. Just a little, but it was something. Over the following weeks, the support from our community was overwhelming. People brought food, offered help with repairs, and made sure we knew we were welcome in Pine Ridge. The local hardware store owner refused to let David pay for security system components. The school counselor checked on Jake regularly and provided additional support. But perhaps the most meaningful gesture came from an unexpected source. In February we received a letter addressed to Jake. It was from a woman named Patricia Chin, whose family had been targeted by Pinnacle Development in Colorado 2 years earlier. "Dear Jake," the letter began, "I heard about what happened to your family, and I wanted you to know that you are a hero in our house." She went on to explain how Pinnacle's harassment had driven her family from their home. They had endured months of fake violations, utility shutoffs, and intimidation tactics before finally giving up and selling their property for far less than it was worth. "We didn't have someone as brave as you to protect us," she wrote. "Because of your courage, our family and dozens of others will get justice. The bad people who hurt us are going to prison, and families like ours will be compensated for what we lost." She included a photo of her own 12-year-old son Tommy, holding a sign that read, "Thank you, Jake." Jake read the letter 3 times before showing it to David and me. For the first time since the incident, I saw something like pride in his eyes. "She's right, you know," David said, sitting beside Jake on the couch. "What you did that night saved not just us but a lot of other families too." Jake nodded slowly. "I still wish I didn't have to hurt that man," he said quietly. "That shows what a good person you are," I told him. "Feeling sorry about hurting someone, even someone who was trying to hurt us, means you have a kind heart." By spring Jake was doing better. The nightmares came less frequently, and he had started drawing again, not the dark, troubled images from before, but pictures of our cabin, the mountains, and our little family. He joined the school's archery club, which Dr. Reeves thought would help him process his relationship with weapons and accuracy in a positive, controlled environment. He was naturally gifted at archery, and the focus required for the sport seemed to calm his anxious mind. David found steady work with a local construction company that specialized in mountain homes. The owner, Bill Patterson, was one of the people who had been harassed by fake HOA letters before our incident exposed the scheme. "I owe your family a debt," Bill told David when he offered him the job. "What happened to you folks brought down the people who were trying to destroy our community. As for me, I started a support group for families who had been victimized by corporate intimidation schemes." Word spread through social media and legal aid organizations, and soon I was corresponding with people from across the country who had faced similar situations. We met once a month at the community center in Pine Ridge, sharing stories, offering advice, and providing emotional support. Many of the participants were parents whose children had witnessed or experienced trauma during home invasions or harassment campaigns. Jake sometimes joined our meetings, sharing his story with other kids who had been through frightening experiences. Dr. Reeves said it was part of his healing process, transforming his trauma into a way to help others. The trial of Robert Hayes and Marcus Webb began in June. As key witnesses, Jake, David, and I had to testify about the events of November 15th. I was nervous about Jake taking the stand, but Dr. Reeves had prepared him well. He spoke clearly and honestly about that night, describing his fear, his decision to get the rifle, and the moment he realized he had to shoot to protect his family. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he told the prosecutor. "But the man had a gun and he was going to hurt my mom and David. I couldn't let that happen." The defense attorney tried to paint Jake as a dangerous child who had been improperly trained with firearms. But the prosecutor countered with testimony from firearms safety experts who confirmed that Jake had acted with remarkable restraint and precision under extreme circumstances. "This child fired one shot, aimed to wound rather than kill, and immediately put down his weapon," the prosecutor argued. "These are not the actions of someone dangerous, but of someone forced to make an impossible choice." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Hayes and Webb were convicted on all charges, including conspiracy, breaking and entering, assault, and fraud. They were sentenced to 8 and 10 years in prison respectively. The executives from Pinnacle Development received even harsher sentences as the scope of their criminal enterprise became clear. In total, they had defrauded over 200 families across 4 states, stealing an estimated $12 million in property value. 2 years after that terrible night, our lives have found a new kind of normal. Jake is 14 now, taller and more confident than the scared 12-year-old who was forced to become a hero. He still sees Dr. Reeves occasionally, but the sessions are less frequent and focus more on typical teenage challenges than trauma. He's become something of a local celebrity in Pine Ridge. Not because of the shooting but because of his character. He volunteers at the community center, helps elderly neighbors with yard work, and has become an advocate for children's safety programs. Last year, he was invited to speak at a national conference on family safety and children's rights. Standing at that podium, speaking to hundreds of adults about the importance of protecting children from corporate predators, he looked like a young man with a bright future ahead of him. David and I were so proud we could barely contain ourselves. Our cabin has been fully restored and then some. The insurance settlement from the break-in, combined with our successful lawsuit against Pinnacle Development, allowed us to make improvements we never could have afforded before. We have a proper security system, a renovated kitchen, and a workshop where David and Jake continue to build things together. But more importantly, we've built something even more valuable, a community of people who look out for each other. The fake HOA crisis brought our mountain neighborhood together in ways that might never have happened otherwise. The support group I started has evolved into a nonprofit organization that helps families fight corporate intimidation. We've successfully assisted over 50 families in keeping their homes and holding predatory companies accountable. Jake serves on our youth advisory board, helping other children who have experienced trauma learn coping strategies and find their own strength. As I write this, sitting on our front porch and watching Jake practice archery in the yard while David repairs a neighbor's fence, I reflect on how much our lives have changed since that November night. We learned that home isn't just a place. It's the people you're willing to fight for and the community that stands behind you when times get tough. We discovered that even children can find courage they never knew they had when the people they love are threatened. Most importantly, we realized that healing from trauma isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't affect us. It's about integrating that experience into our story in a way that makes us stronger, kinder, and more committed to protecting others. Jake will always carry the weight of what he did that night. But he's learned to carry it with pride rather than shame. He saved his family, exposed a criminal conspiracy, and helped dozens of other families keep their homes. Not bad for a 12-year-old kid who just wanted to protect the people he loved. The mountains around our cabin are peaceful now, filled with the sounds of birds and wind through the pines. Our front door is solid oak, our security system is state-of-the-art, and our community is strong. We're not the same family we were before November 15th. We're stronger, closer, and more aware of both the darkness and light that exist in the world. And we're home. The events described in this story highlight the importance of community support, professional help for trauma recovery, and the need for stronger protections against corporate intimidation tactics targeting vulnerable homeowners. If you or someone you know has experienced similar harassment, contact local law enforcement and consider reaching out to legal aid organizations in your area.